welcome again to the community call. I'm sharing on the chat the ArchiDAO NFT repository as it stands at the moment, and I'll go through a description essentially of how it works. So the NFT is kind of like your membership card on the DAO. For us to be able to expand the organization and keep on building on the protocols, we need an easy way to kind of recognize who has contributed and who hasn't contributed to the DAO. And the NFT is our first step to go towards that kind of idea. The idea of soulbound tokens is a kind of radical one where you have an NFT that doesn't leave your address essentially with which you're participating in the DAO. However, and it's an easy one to kind of create because from that point of view, you can create a token that is part of an organization. And if you have that, then you're a member. However, there are problems with it in terms of privacy and so on and so forth. The idea of the ArchiDAO NFT is inherited from the idea of having an NFT that represents your skills and your contribution to the DAO. So we don't recognize the contribution only in terms of monetary sense, and I'll explain how that would work through the ArchiDAO white paper. But your skills and the record of your skills gets updated every time you join a workshop and you can complete a task, or you join a project and you're able essentially to contribute meaningfully to the project. We have kind of wanted to decouple the idea of the governance following the amount of tokens you have, because this can easily then turn the DAO from an architecture DAO to a plutocracy, right? So whoever holds the most tokens can kind of steer the DAO to wherever we want. But actually, ArchiDAO is more of an organization that deals with knowledge and expertise, and it is your expertise actually that is valuable essentially. So we wanted the NFT to represent that. However, we might run into trouble in terms of having, for example, your name on a blockchain or other characteristics that will go on a smart contract, which is a big no-no, right? So you must not, or at least in our opinion, right? You might have other jurisdictions that have no problems with having public records online and in an immutable package, right? So we thought that at least the NFTs should be anonymous or pseudo-anonymous, and then have another way to verify contributions. And the way to do that is by going with a full Web3 approach, where we connect the NFT to verifiable credentials as specified by the WWW consortium. So essentially the web consortium and decentralized identifiers. And obviously these are specifications that don't need to live on chain and can be issued as a different matter. We think at the moment the best solution that exists is probably the ID services provided by Polygon. So we're probably going to build something around that. But what we want to do initially is start issuing the NFTs to members, so that we start having a base of, actually developing a base of members in a much more organic kind of manner on chain as well. We do have a good list in terms of who is participating in the Discord and in certain projects, but we think the ArchiDAO NFT will help us improve on that. So be on the lookout for an announcement and or an email that will allow you essentially to verify yourself and to share your Ethereum address with us, because this will allow us to whitelist you and then be able to participate in getting the NFT early and then being a member of the DAO. Other than being a member of the DAO, you don't get any more benefits at the moment, but at least maybe later we might have airdrops that are connected to workshops or different projects. But certainly also it gives you governance rights with a very easy way to understand this, either through snapshot or directly through the smart contract as we will build it. The idea is that the NFT will have a one-to-one governance, right? So one NFT is essentially one vote. I'm going to pause here if anybody has any questions on this. No? Okay. I mean, feel free to raise your hand and ask anything if you want. And I'll share now a couple of projects that we recently did. Open my presentation. In classic fashion, you open the presentation and then Sri, you're going to enable sharing. Very good, thank you. So one of the issues that we have essentially when we're describing concepts that deal with the use of blockchain in AC is for people to kind of understand in a much more traditional visual kind of manner of how things operate and how they work. So part of what the DAO has been building is taking not just the smart contracts, but actually designing around the idea of using blockchain in AC, whether this is in design phase or whether this is in the construction phase and engineering phase. So this is one of those projects. This was an architectural design competition for a public bridge in Sofia, Bulgaria. It was executed by Sofia Rusinova, Olivia Gospodinova, Yorgos Berdos, me, and Simon Prokop. And the idea was to participate in the competition for a public bridge and pathway in Sofia that it was essentially a public competition. It was asking for a connection between two parts of a South Park in Sofia, along with the idea of a creation of a usability essentially framework of that part, right? So you see here the north part and the, I don't know if my cursor doesn't work there, but I hope the diagrams are understandable. So on the top part, you see the north part of the South Park, and on the bottom left part, you see the south part, and these were the two that we needed to connect. On the left part of the image, you see a kind of recognition of a mesh network that we found kind of existing as of activities and of geometrical nodes on the site. On the left and right of the park, there are athletic facilities, so a basketball court and I think it's an aquatics center, so pools and water polo kind of idea. And even though there is a cycling, a disparate cycling path that takes you to the park, there is no network within the park and no kind of unifying approach of mobility within the park. So our first task was to essentially kind of create that network, and through that also have this emergent kind of spine through the mesh network that would provide essentially the first direction of how to connect between the two. And all of the nodes essentially on the mesh network would also get what we call follies, kind of inspired by the part of the La Villette and the work of Bernard Tschumi there. So essentially architectural installations that allow you to have an indeterminate network of activities, from selling used books to selling food or any other kind of communal activity. Now, where does blockchain come into play, right? And this comes into play in essentially taking the whole construction and the whole structure, and also the follies that we imagine, and you see some of them on the bottom part of the image, and making them, analyzing them into the components of which they are made, and each of one of those components can be made into a token, right? And we have already showcased in research how this can be done directly through connection of design software with a smart contract. So while you're developing these braids, essentially you are building within Grasshopper or Blender this kind of assembly of components, and then you can script essentially a kind of structure where the components of the design are published on the blockchain, and you see on the right hand the whole governance structure that we have thought of. I'll go a little bit deeper and zoom in. So you have essentially the kind of spine of circulation that gets developed. This gets published on the network in terms of tokens, and people from the community essentially can buy one of these and help, first of all, fund the development of the project. But at the same time, on a second level later on, they can also use the token as a governance mechanism to decide what kind of functions will go into the follies, and how exactly these are going to be built and when. And you see essentially how we can use different grids essentially to develop various parts of the surface of the braids, the balustrades, and everything else that is needed essentially to assemble this as a structure. The follies by design already are particle based. So from that point of view, you have the opportunity to kind of create a whole form in an emergent fashion from having a basic structure, and then everything else gets developed bottom up. And these are kind of images of what we thought this would look like, right? Unfortunately, we didn't win any of the awards or honorable mentions, but the project is still worth it from that point of view. And another one I wanted to showcase. So I'll pause here for questions if anybody has any questions. See, Milos has joined us as well. Hi, Milos.
Hi. Liam sent me the link. Hi, just to join shortly.
Perfect. Nice to meet you up close, actually.
Nice meeting you. Yeah.
I've read some of your work, and it's really impressive what you do.
Thanks.
Let me try and find a screenshot now, which I'm going to show as a teaser because we haven't completed the project. So we also participated in a hackathon that deals with the metaverse, and this was in collaboration with ETH, the chair of Industrial and Innovative Construction. This was on building a digital twin of the NoAnsWan prototype. So the one you see here is essentially a space for meditation that works and gets activated through blockchain technologies and smart contracts. And this was built by the NoAnsWan team and the chair for industrial construction. The particular project was headed initially by Jens Huchenwitz and then Hongyang Wang or Una. And along with members of the DAO, we modeled or translated the model into a model that was used in Decentraland, and there is a two-way communication between the model in Decentraland and the NoAnsWan platform. And this was kind of like a really mini prototype to showcase governance of a physical asset through its metaverse digital twin. We've gone through also a couple of other papers that deal with crypto twins and essentially digital twins in using blockchain technologies, and we think there is an ample space there for development. But I'm also going to pause here and see if there are any questions. No, good. So I guess these are the updates for the community, right? So just to sum up, ArchiDAO is really active in terms of developing projects that exploit blockchain technologies and smart contracts to kind of push the envelope of what is possible in AEC, whether this is on a conceptual level or really hands-on practical level with prototypes. So if you are interested in any of these, just talk to us on Discord or email, and we can include you in next parts of our team building exercises. But much more importantly, before that, in the next, we hope until the end of the year, we will be issuing the ArchiDAO NFT that allows you to be a member of the DAO. And I think that will start kind of accelerating our growth. Any questions? Cool. Any comments? I mean, you might share your thoughts as well. They don't have to be questions.
I don't know. This is off topic, off of the intro slide, but something that I've been exploring in the back of my head is the idea of generative AI and the impact on integrated project delivery. So just kind of like posing that question of, I've seen this thing take off with any of the generative AI that's out there in the space, but I'm curious to get, or a conversation for future topics of how do we bridge that gap between scanning a digital space, designing it in virtual space, and tying it back to actual cost estimation. Because I'm thinking we're getting to the point where between companies like Matterport or Canvas, where there's going to be a big enough data set of spatial information so that you can take state A of spatial information with state B of spatial information, process that through a database, and tie that back to actual pricing. And in theory, get an AI that can actually predict within some reason of certainty, like the actual price for that project. So I'm just curious with that context, if anyone else has been thinking about that or thoughts on that, or like generative AI for pricing out the construction part of the whole process.
Are you interested in the costing part of it or the design part of it, the generative part?
Both, because like the generative AI would give you the design, right? Like let's say you sent it over the spatial images of the current state, and then you would say, give me a design based off of these initial state. But then that generative design is then also tied to actual cost implications. And so even if it is within 20 degrees of certainty, that's enough information to give the entire team like some feedback on what they can adjust, right? Like if a client says, I want to take this commercial high rise and make it totally open concept, and you just feed that into one of the prompts, and it were tied to actual data based on historical projects. Even that little first level of data point at the start of the design build project or an integrated project would be able to give you some guide rails. So it's a bit of both. It's both like putting in the prompt and generating the design, but then tying it back with some bit of information that is useful at the start of the project to guide it to a successful completion on the given the budget.
So just as a first take on this, I would say looking into my paper on decentralized and architectural design, where the agents participating in the competition or collaboration in solving a problem, they're not always human. So the idea there is that from the blockchain perspective, you don't care who provides the solution. It might be a machine learning algorithm, or it might be a human giving you the answer. Now, at the moment, I don't think there is. So the problem with design is that it's essentially a very, very, very wicked problem, and unless you define the problem really well, you won't get good solutions from a machine learning algorithm, even though that slightly changes at the moment. So it depends on what kind of, so how it is depending on what kind of workflow you set the problem with. Now, I'm not experienced in terms of pricing per se, but I would guess it might be a problem of data availability and being able to have full transparency on the market. But if we're discussing from the point of view of having everything on the blockchain, what you're describing might be easy from the point of view of saying, here's the problem, here's a design that I generate, and I can cost it immediately really nicely. But half your problem is going to be, where do you get the data? So that's point number one. Point number two is who gets the responsibility for it in the real world, right? So who is responsible for the design generated by a machine learning tool? And I guess there you need some level of agency and kind of legal assurances of having essentially a responsibility for faults or mistakes, essentially. But what would be needed to kind of at least go close to what you're describing is a much more integrated approach in developing part of the projects, which still we don't yet have.
Yeah, I'm just like stuck on that idea of like the data. I don't know at what point there's an inflection point where the data is openly available. So that, in theory, again, theory is very different than reality. You take all the architectural builds that all the construction projects that happen across the world, and you would be able to say, well, it started at point A and through the final designs ended at point B, and here is the price. Feed it into a machine and actually be able to generate some insight, whether it's roughly $1 per square foot, based on even like the theme of.
Have you looked at Ocean Protocol?
I have not.
So Ocean Protocol allows you to create essentially data markets, and this is close to one of the projects I'm trying to develop with another machine learning and computer vision researcher called Eero Armeni from ETH. So the idea there is that building owners and construction owners can provide the data set to the Ocean Protocol, and then you use a system of tokens to be able to read it and then to train machine learning and computer vision algorithms in various tasks. For example, safety, or it could be cost, actually, from that point of view. Now, the Ocean Protocol allows data owners to participate in a data pool without relinquishing ownership of the data, which is one of the biggest problems you might have when you go and ask people for data, right? So they'll tell you, well, we're not going to give it to you because we need to maintain a gated relationship compared to what you need to read. But at the same time, to train an algorithm, you need to actually read the data. So you use essentially a cryptographic token to regulate that with the Ocean Protocol. Again, you would need probably at least some willing partners to participate to be able to build it. But we are trying to build something similar.
Awesome. I'll look into that protocol. I haven't heard of it, so I'll add it to the list when I go down the rabbit hole of research.
Take a look, and then we talk when you want to engage again with that. Excellent.
I guess to bounce off of that idea, I might have a question for you, Theo, from your point of view, because we're talking about data, and there is a big disparity between like the built environment and then let's say like the digital twin, or if you want to kind of digitize the real world. And especially since the trend is moving towards more adaptive reuse, since a lot of projects are cheaper and it's more efficient than building from scratch. And then there's a big disparity between what's actually built from what was actually drawn. And you realize that on site, it's not really what you have in the database. How would you go around that?
Well, I think hilariously, Milos is probably better suited to talk about that because he's done massive projects on that level. But I think that's not potentially the issue with the digital aspect of it. It is actually the issue with how the construction industry has been operating for a long time, right? So first of all, globally, if you try to build something, the kind of sizing and accuracy tolerance is very poor, right? So you are trying to build something, and then you will see that even in legal frameworks, a tolerance of 5 centimeters is acceptable, whereas you would go, within a very accurate system that is not wasteful and is not, is not trying to go with the kind of easiest path forward. A tolerance of 5 centimeters is not acceptable, right? I would even say a tolerance of 1 millimeter. You need to be exact on that level. So part of it has to do with how the industry has worked in a historical format, right? So it has always been decentralized, and that's why potentially blockchain is a good fit. It has always been based on the idea that people come together for a single project and then they kind of disassemble and go to other projects, right? So one of the problems we have had is that knowledge gained in one project doesn't follow through in the next one, right? So I learned something here because I work with you, but then when I need to kind of go to the next project, this doesn't carry on, right? And this is something new for the industry. New, I mean, in relation to the kind of record we have. And when you look at, for example, I'll take the aviation industry as an example, right? So tolerances and failures of 5 centimeters are not acceptable because the industry in aviation has kind of gone with this kind of anti-fragile approach where if there is a failure, if there is a mistake, they learn from it, right? And they have these processes where safety and security are paramount. And from that point of view, they have kind of created a culture that drives towards that kind of idea. Now, we are kind of going through the second or even the third digital turn where we might go closer to the idea that the architect is very close to fabricating whatever they're designing. And there is no longer this kind of separation between I design something and then someone else is going to build it, which is also, I think, pretty bad as a project structure. So I think one of the things that does take place is that we see certain parts of the industry in certain countries moving away from this idea that we are tolerant to that. Now, going back to the retrofits, one of the biggest problems you have there is the problem of data, right? So you don't know what exactly exists in that building. And there are research teams around the world and companies that are trying to solve that either by the use of very clever linking of data and speculation through machine learning, right? So you look at the map of a city, you look at Google Images, and then you try using very good guesses in terms of how they structure an AEC algorithm to understand what kind of materials you have inside the building. But also you have uber accurate processes like the ones described by Jefferson White, where you go in with a laser scanner, you scan everything, you have very accurate kind of dimensional approaches. If you really want to look into how that scan to BIM kind of workflow works, look into what WeWork did with their the company they bought to do their offices back in the day. So they kind of had an architecture office which would be very, very, very good in going in, scanning a space, developing the 3D model, and then through that develop the whole WeWork package for any office around the world. And WeWork ended up, instead of paying them, they were like, it's cheaper for us to buy you, and then you're an internal unit of how you will work. And these are good processes in any kind of developed country where you have access to these accurate kind of mechanisms. But the moment you go, for example, in developing countries, I'll mention China because I live there and I have worked within the construction industry there. Some of those processes no longer work. So you have to find ways to adapt in terms of what you can do. And potentially you go again with a high-tech, low-tech approach. So you need to kind of find ways to be inventive with fabrication, essentially. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's my...
Yeah, no, it answers the question really well. Because I guess, yeah, in an ideal world, it would be to kind of start the right way. So the framework is correct for the next centuries of the building. But because most of the world is already built, then we have all these buildings that have been built with different customs, different traditions, different ways of building. Now it's a question of like, how do you get the data from this existing building? And I think the only way is to really like break a wall and see what's inside, or like demolish it and see what's actually inside.
Exactly, right. So you need to go into kind of restoration practices. If you look at restoration practices, a lot of them have the tools and the skill sets to work with retrofits, essentially. Also, you need to remember that compared to the kind of building stock we have to deal with, right? So let's say you have building stock that is 100 years old, 200 years old. I mean, Europe is even worse. The way we now build, which is performance-based, is completely the opposite compared to a traditional architecture, right? Because now we go with a target and say, well, the building needs to perform this, right? So you need to kind of do specific things that pertain to that. Whereas with a much more local and traditional based architecture, you get more of a very slow evolutionary process of how certain professions have gone through. Anyway, I think it's a fascinating reflection, and I think you will never get. It's good that you're young and you're asking those questions. You'll never get kind of like a clean slate where everything is good and clean and everything is coordinated in architecture, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for the response. Good.
I need to jump on my next meeting. So I have some students waiting I need to look at our projects. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for the contributions, and be on the lookout for more announcements on the ArchiDAO NFT and the projects. And have a nice evening, morning, and the rest of the week.